Welcome to this edition of the Star Drive Report. Bruce Cornet received a BA degree in 1970 in biology from the University of Connecticut, a master's degree in 1972 in paleobotany from that same university, and graduated from Penn State in 1977 with a PhD in geology and palynology, the study of fossil spores and pollen used to age and date rocks. He spent 11 years in the oil industry, working for Gulf Research and Development, Exxon USA, Mobil Oil Corporation, and Superior Oil Company, all in Houston, Texas. He's published 21 scientific papers, a couple of books, and numerous abstracts on subjects in paleobotany, palynology, and geology, all accessible on ResearchGate. He taught geology and botany at the Raritan Valley Community College for a year before accepting a position as deputy administrator at the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIDS, in Las Vegas in 2004 until NIDS was closed down. He subsequently taught geology at El Paso Community College, Dona Ana Branch Community College, and online for the Raritan Valley Community College before retiring. He is now nearly finished writing 2 books on his scientific and spiritual discoveries over the past 37 years. In 1992, Bruce discovered that he lived next to the Pine Bush UFO hotspot in New York State, extensively documented by Dr. Ellen Crystal in her classic 1991 book, Silent Invasion. From 1983 to 1986, the Hudson Valley experienced one of the most well-witnessed and widespread UFO outbreaks in modern history, with over 5,000 local residents reporting such incidents. He began an exhaustive 3-year, 24-square-mile magnetic survey, discovering many geomagnetic anomalies underground, along with documenting over 137 close encounters with unconventional aircraft. Much of those data are published on his numerous web pages. One of the most remarkable things Bruce encountered in his extensive survey was the detection of what he believed to be some kind of active underground alien probe beneath and adjacent to the Beth Hillel Jewish Cemetery off Route 52. Using a highly sensitive proton magnetometer, also known as the proton precession magnetometer, which uses the principle of Earth's field nuclear magnetic resonance to measure very small variations in the Earth's magnetic field, Bruce detected 3 powerful anomalous magnetic beams shooting out of the ground straight into space. These 3 magnetic beams formed an equilateral triangle 468 feet on a side. On November 8th and 9th, 2007, the History Channel brought magnetometers and a ground-penetrating radar system to the location of the anomalous magnetic signal for an episode of their show, The UFO Hunters. Ground-penetrating radar used along the south side of the cemetery encountered a buried object 7 to 9 feet below the surface, surrounded by Ordovician shales of the Austin Glen Formation, which is exactly where Cornet's hypothesis predicted it would be found. Measurements indicated that the object is more than 20 feet thick. GPR data extends only down to 27 feet and does not show the bottom of the object nor what it is resting on. Neither the Beth Hillel Cemetery or the owner of the adjacent property would consent to excavation on their properties. Even more interesting was that the History Channel never aired the footage of this survey, leading Bruce to conjecture that it was quashed from above. I'd like to welcome our guest, Bruce Cornet, to the Star Drive Report.
Well, thank you, Tim, for inviting me.
How are things down in El Paso?
Wonderful. The climate here is much better than the rest of the country. I sort of like it here, climate-wise.
How long have you been down there?
Well, since 2004.
All right.
Hey, tell me quickly, though, what about the immigrant situation, the border? How's it at the border in terms of your experience?
Well, they have it pretty well, locked up here. There are only a couple, ports of entry in this area, and the wall is complete here.
Oh, okay.
You've been conducting detailed electronic and photographic observation and analysis of the UFO phenomenon for almost 30 years, including a position as deputy administrator at the National Institute for Discovery Science, Bob Bigelow's organization, now defunct, in Las Vegas until 2004. And in your bio, you mentioned that you lived near the well-known Pine Bush, New York UFO hotspot. And I'm wondering, was that the primary reason you originally became so interested in the subject, or was it something more personal?
Well, I had no idea that this area was a UFO hotspot. Before I went to the bookstore, I had seen the miniseries on television, Intruders, by Bud Hopkins, and I was amazed that such a subject was being put on primetime television. Because working in academia, we never ever ran into any talk about UFOs. That was foreboding. And so when I got the book at the bookstore, the manager said, well, why don't you get this book also? It was Silent Invasion by Ellen Crystal. And I read that and it was totally blown away about her research area that encompassed where I lived. And she was seeing all of these amazing lights in the sky and ships that were coming down to within maybe a couple hundred feet of her. And so I talked to some of my friends who asked if anybody knew Ellen Crystal, and some of them did, and they got me her phone number. And I called her up, and I said, would you be willing to take me out into the field? I would like to see some of the stuff that you claim in your book. I said, your last name is Crystal, and my last, and I'm a geologist, and my last name is Cornet, and you're a musician. Perhaps we could work well together. And she agreed and took me out. And on the first night we were out there, I was blown away. The ships were coming in, flying over us. I mean, it looked like we were standing in the middle of the tarmac on a busy international airport.
Wow!
And it just totally took my breath away. And I had to go out there and get start photographing and documenting all of this. And that began also on the 18th of June, 1992. I started a magnetic survey. I borrowed a proton magnetometer from the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory where I worked, and because Ellen had claimed that there was an underground alien base where we lived, I figured that if I did a magnetic survey, I could find magnetic anomalies that could not be explained by natural mineral processes. And I did. I did a 3-year, 24 square mile magnetic survey, going out and taking measurements almost every night and on the weekends. And
were you doing it like in a grid? Were you doing it in a grid pattern, or were you just concentrating on certain areas?
Well, any traverse that I could do, many around the roads. I had special stations. I kept on going back to and getting another value so that I could compare values. Mm-hmm. And I would cut across farm fields and do all sorts of paths through the woods and farm fields in order to collect data. It was quite extensive, and some of the hotspot areas, one of them which was at the center of the area where I did most of my observation. When I went in there with a magnetometer, the area was alive with magnetic pulses and anomalies. And I couldn't believe 400 gammas above background.
Wow.
I mean, this was outrageous. And then Ellen Crystal and two other people and I were at our main station along West Searsville Road, and we saw what appeared to be a commercial airline flying towards the hotspot. And I said, what is that plane doing up there? And we were all confused because we're near Stewart Airport, and commercial air flight cuts across the valley, but very rarely does it cut across the hotspot. It's usually stays behind us to the west instead of towards the east. But here comes this American Airlines jetliner, and it's descending. And I have a recording of somebody saying, is that an aircraft going to land in the field in front of us? No, it's on its way to Stewart. oh, that can't be. Look, it's coming right towards us. And sure enough, it descended to within 100 feet of the trees. And before the pilot saw the force coming up at him, and he immediately reversed direction of the aircraft and turned on his engines full blast, full power, and climbed up out of harm's way. And the whole plane was shaking as it climbed and resumed its path.
So do you think that this something was interfering with this plane's navigational systems?
Absolutely. There's no other way that you could explain that. The magnetic pulses that were coming out of the ground were so strong that, otherwise, why would we have a requirement to shut off all our electronics when we're flying on an airplane?
Right.
And so this was a significant demonstration that there really was something going on there. And I have documented and with time exposures, many craft coming out of the ground and going into the ground in that area, literally diving right into the forest and into the ground without any explosions. So what's going on here?
I don't know. I mean, I noticed on your website you talk about a possible alien triangular robotic probe entombed in ancient rock 450 million years old. What's going on with that?
Well, during my 24 square mile magnetic survey, I found an area where there are these extreme magnetic pulses coming out of the ground. This was underneath the Jewish Beth Hillel Cemetery along Route 52 between Walden and Pine Bush. And I would go back to that same location because Ellen recorded a lot of strange anomalies there, and I was recording generally unusual magnetic anomalies. But in three locations, I determined on whenever the constellation Bootes was overhead, there were these very powerful beams of magnetic anomalies firing out of the ground vertically, and they were about maybe 2 feet in diameter. And they were 10 to 11,000 gammas, pulses. And they were on, maybe one every 8 to 10 seconds. And they would be variable between the 3 points. In other words, one would be above background, all the anomalies, and the other would be below background, and the other would vary above and below background just a little bit. So I had a very strong suspicion that there was something mechanical, technological underneath the ground. And it wasn't until the History Channel came and they brought in a ground-penetrating radar. They wanted to see if there was anything there, and we were able to make a traverse across an edge of this triangle and imaged it. We actually imaged it 9 feet below the surface, embedded within solid Ordovician black shale. And it had typical compression anomalies around it where the sediment was compressed, whereas the object was not compressed. And you could see sediment had been deposited on top of it. And so it was clearly of the same age as the rocks.
Did anybody bother did they excavate? Did they?
Oh, somebody wanted to excavate it, but nobody has actually been able to get the permission to do it. Partly because it's owned privately, both by the Jewish community. They didn't want anybody digging in it,
sure.
And the other half of the triangle was outside in a farm field, and that was owned by some Koreans. Farmers, and they didn't want anybody digging in their property.
How big is this thing roughly in dimensions?
It's I measured it, and it was 565 feet on a side, and about over 20 feet thick. So the implication is that it was a mining probe that landed on an island. I was able to map out and show where all these islands were, and every one of the islands made up of magnetic granite had anomalies of UFOs flying into and out of the ground over them. So whatever was going on there. These granite islands were of very much of importance to whoever was doing this.
You're talking about 460 million years ago?
Yes, 420.
420, okay.
Yes. So this was before land plants and the fishes were just beginning to evolve in the oceans. You had a lot of invertebrates in the oceans at that time, but and I found signals coming out of the ground at two other locations too, and one was the center of the UFO hotspot, where we had tremendous amount of energy coming out of the ground.
Okay. I'm looking at one of your photographs called the Vortex, taken on 28 April 1993, and I've seen this photograph before, and it always impressed me. That's really, really amazing. I'm blowing it up here and looking at the high resolution part, and what's going on in the center of that? You have the two beams of light shooting out horizontally, and this amazing structure or something in the center of the picture.
Right. You notice that
it almost looks like a wormhole or something.
Right. That's why the History Channel called it a UFO vortex, and that the craft had opened up a portal and then closed it. That was the implication on the television show.
Okay.
That aired on the 26th. Yes, Jack?
Yeah, that's very interesting, because everything I'm doing now in terms of the physics is consistent with that kind of a phenomenon happening. I just want to say that. But continue.
Okay. But I also noticed that, I've had other types of holograms being projected by these craft, including a golden pyramid coming with a light coming up the middle, and a Greek type of temple sitting on a cornfield, a green temple. And so they were trying to communicate something with these holograms. And I wondered whether or not that vortex image could be interpreted another way. If you look at it carefully, you'll see on the left that you have a series of rings or orbits around a central light, a very tiny light. Mm-hmm. And then you'll see a band of golden light going over to the right to a blue star.
Yeah.
So you have a blue star, and then you have a yellow star, and you have what appear to be orbits with other colored orbs in those rings, mm-hmm. so implying that we might be looking at a solar system, okay? And that the solar system might have a dark star planet, a blue star planet, as its companion. So what binary solar system might this represent if that was the intention?
Wow, it's almost as though it's like the flat membrane not a wormhole but a Stargate. I mean, it sort of looks like that. Mm-hmm. So what are you?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't want to change the subject, but I'm just going to ask you: are you still working do you still do this kind of analysis presently? Are you still going out and getting photography of these objects, or?
Ever since I crossed the Mississippi River to go to work for NIDS, my sightings have dropped to zero.
Well, that's interesting.
And it's almost as if I was hired by NIDS in order to get me away from my field of interest and investigation.
Wow.
And I've had all this material. I have, just reams and reams of data that I've been processing, reworking, and putting into a book that I'm writing. I now have my Appendix 1 has documented over 140 close encounters with photographs of all of them. And images from videos. So there's a tremendous amount of activity in this area of the Wallkill River basin, and what I'm wanting to know and hoping that I would get some help from other scientists is, why is this activity concentrated in this one area, and are these craft or lights the product of could some of them be the product of reverse engineering? In other words, are they ETVs, are extraterrestrial vehicles, or are they ARVs, alien reproductive vehicles?
Is this activity continuing to this day in the Pine Bush area?
I just contacted a friend that goes to Pine Bush, and he said, yes, there still is activity, but it's not that common. The fascinating part is that in 1997, everything shut down in the valley. And you might ask, well, why would it shut down? And we had at that same time an ordinance being enacted by in Montgomery and Walden to forbid people from skywatching on the roads at night, because the realtors wanted to build houses along the very roads that we skywatched on, and they felt that we would lower the value of their property. So we had to find other places to watch. And that was one of the reasons why I didn't go back there after that, but I went to other areas. And I had people contacting me and say, well, why don't you come over to my place? I've got some of your ships flying over my house. And so the activity was still going on, but it avoided that one area. And then if you look at Cheryl Costa's book that came out recently on all of the sightings across the United States, and look at New York, you'll see that the activity shifted from west of the Hudson River to east of the Hudson River into Long Island at that time, which I found to be very interesting, that it could move around. But if there was an underground base there where I was seeing all these craft, and what happened to that base?
Yeah, I mean,
we do know that
the Hudson Valley stuff was going on for quite some time, and I guess that was related in some way to what was going on at Pine Bush. We had all those triangular Hudson Valley sightings in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Absolutely.
Bud Hopkins wrote about that.
Yeah, and of course, J. Allen Hynek was very much involved with Phil Imbrogno in describing the night siege of those huge ships that were floating over
the giant black triangles.
Yes, and we saw smaller versions of those over Pine Bush, although I talked to one lady who had worked for the police department there that said that one night she came in to work and this huge craft was hovering over part of the Pine Bush, the town. And she actually went out into a field and stood under it. And she looked up at it, and it said it was bigger than a football stadium, and that it had looked like the back of a refrigerator with all of these tubes and pipes, positioned underneath it. She thought that was rather unusual.
Yeah, other people have reported that. People were reporting that with who saw the underside of the huge craft in Phoenix Lights. They were reporting similar things. They were able to see real details on the underside. Very, it was very technological looking.
And Ellen says that in her book that she's seen the underside of some of these triangles that floated over her, and she said there was a glass plate separate from the metal hull. That's how she described it. In other words, there was a multi-layered hull with different materials on it that she could detect.
Interesting. I noticed the other day that you and Jack got into an email thread regarding some interesting effect regarding the Doppler shift or the reverse Doppler shift. Can you guys just get it for the lay audience, explain, number one, what the Doppler shift is and how it's relevant to your discussion? Because this could be very important given some of the information that Jack is uncovering and some of the physics.
Yeah. I can describe how I recorded it, because these craft would produce sounds, and many times they tried to mimic the sounds of commercial aircraft. And I even recorded one, and when I played it, not only do you have the frequencies of the sound decreasing as the sound source came towards the microphone, but you also had, when I compared it and reversed it on my computer, it sounded like a large Boeing jet taking off from an airport, but that the sound had been recorded and replayed out of speakers on the craft, and that you have no white noise. That all of the frequencies were there were at least 12 different frequencies separated from one another, which is not what you get with the sound coming from a turbofan engine. So these craft would produce different kinds of sounds at different times, some that resembled commercial aircraft, and others that didn't resemble anything. And they would all exhibit the same phenomena, this reverse Doppler, where the frequencies decrease on approach and increase on departure.
Okay. Let me interject there. That's exactly what one expects from the kind of low power metric engineering of the gravitational field would give. So that's all very consistent. What I'm wondering now is if Kevin Day, the Navy guy who was in the radar room at the USS Princeton in the November 14, 2004 close encounter with the fleet of Tic Tacs, if their radar signals also showed a reverse Doppler. I don't know if their radar systems would have that capability, but I would think they would, and that would be really interesting.
Yes, that would be very, very important.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the Tic Tac didn't generate any sound of its own.
Well,
so
I mean, yes. Well, no, I'm talking about the radar signals themselves. See, if it's warp drive, any kind of disturbance, any kind of sound waves or electromagnetic waves or radar waves, they'll all show that reverse effect. Because what it's rippling in the space itself, in the fabric of space itself. That's doing it. So it's universal. Everything gets affected by it. Everything gets warped.
Also, one of the things that I noticed with the spectrograms, I recorded all of these sounds, and I generated spectrograms. And what you see on those are multiple separate frequencies that stay distinct. But as the sound source came over the microphone, all of those frequencies were at their lowest level of frequency, and they were all closest together. In other words, the frequency became closer together right over the microphone. And then as the sound source either was further away, the frequency separated into, almost like a scalar effect.
Interesting. You just gave me an idea when you said that. Recently, Kip Thorne's group, they've observed all these gravitational waves coming from the collision, the fusion of black holes and, neutron stars, all that stuff that Kip got the Nobel Prize for. But my point is they've developed very sophisticated techniques in which they can analyze the spectra, the sorts of things you measure, but in this case for the gravitational waves, and they can correlate that with what the gravitational field at the black holes are doing. So those techniques, those computer programs, I think can be adapted to your data. And the idea would be, given your data, what kind of gravitational field distortions that the object would produce those kinds of signals. That can be done. And that would be, of course, that's an expensive project. That's it's a major scientific endeavor, but it's definitely possible.
That would be very great to have that kind of information. But one of the things I noticed, Jack, is that I was talking about reverse Doppler back in the late 80s on my web pages. Yeah. And then suddenly in around 2000 up to 2016, we started having papers coming out from different laboratories saying that they had documented reverse Doppler on different types of synthetic materials and fibers.
Yeah, like the metamaterials too? I'm trying to remember now. Isn't there something about metamaterials showing reverse Doppler? I seem to recall that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought that was wild. I mean, that there we have this confirmation that we have something different about the material makeup of the hulls of these ships.
Yeah, and Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff have revealed that the materials they're playing with are layered, engineered metamaterials of the kind that we don't know how to make presently because the scale is like angstroms. Resolution of angstroms, and our technology is not quite that good yet.
And you've been talking about how there's this relationship between the speed of light and gravity. Is that correct?
Okay, let's see if I can do this briefly for a popular audience. Einstein's gravity equations contain a coupling strength that connects the energy creating the gravitational field to the amount of warping or curvature in space that it produces, or in space-time that it produces. And that strength of coupling depends upon the speed of light. But you have to know a little bit of algebra, and I don't want to get too detailed, but the speed of light appears in the denominator of this coupling coefficient raised to the fourth power. Now, that means that if you could control the speed of light in a material, and if you could make the speed of light very small, then the strength of the interaction between your onboard, say, electromagnetic field and the gravitational field it's producing will go up. So in other words, if you can make the speed of light very small in this material, then the amount of energy you need to counteract, say, the Earth's gravitational field goes down by a dramatic factor. And as a matter of fact, now recently somebody, Art Wagner, sent a Nature paper from 2016 in which these guys in Korea have produced this extraordinary material in which I calculate that it would only take about 3 volts per meter of electric field inside this material to counteract the gravitational field around the Earth, so that this thing, this piece could fly. I only did this particular numerical calculation very, very rapidly this morning when I was getting ready for this podcast, so I may have made an arithmetical mistake, but there are other physicists that I'm working with, and if I made the mistake, it'll be corrected. But the point is, it looks like a very weak electromagnetic field can do the trick, and this would be consistent with the tic-tac and everything else that that you're seeing.
Oh, by the way, I'm just reading here that the reverse or inverse Doppler effect was predicted in 1968 by a Soviet physicist.
Oh yeah, right.
And they have observed it in radio frequencies, and then recently they did it optically using lasers.
Yeah.
So, and they're basically what they're using are very, very tiny little rods. It's metamaterials. They're using metamaterials to do this.
Yeah.
So, just thought I'd add that.
And don't forget quasi-crystals. I mean, these very strange crystals where almost every other atom in the crystal is something different.
Yeah. Now, that's interesting you mentioned that, because I know this guy named Clee Irwin down in Topanga Canyon, and he has a whole group of physicists researching these quasi-crystals, and he's also interested in what we're talking about. That I know. I visited down there, gave a talk on YouTube. So the quasi-crystal connection and the material connection, all very relevant pieces of the puzzle, and we just need a kind of coherent effort to really try to understand what's going on here. And what Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis are doing is an attempt to go in that direction. But we really need to unify and really get together and work as a team on this.
Absolutely. One more question about that Pine Bush hotspot. As a geologist, this is right up your alley. You effectively ruled out any kind of natural mineral-related phenomena, or metallurgical phenomena, geological phenomena responsible for these spikes.
Right. Largely because they were so focused. I mean, I had on my proton magnetometer, were two sensors on a long pole in the gradiometer configuration, and I had a computer hanging from my chest. And what this would do would allow me to orient the direction of the magnetic field that I was recording. And I found that when I was more than maybe 10 or 15 feet from the beam that was coming out of the ground, and it was passing right through solid rock, obviously, I could barely detect it or not detect it unless I was pointing that pole with the sensors on it directly at the beam. And when the History Channel came there and the UFO hunters with their magnetometers, one of them went over to where one of the signals was coming out and put his magnetometer, handheld magnetometer, up against the tree and recorded 1.7 Gauss magnetic field, which is huge. Mm-hmm. And we couldn't believe it. That was coming right out of the ground. And so we've also noticed that during the winter, the ground is warmer there sometimes over this buried triangle, and the snow melts. And we have pictures of that. And during the summer, we have many people who have gone into that cemetery to skywatch and noticed that the temperature in the cemetery over this object has dropped 10 to 15 degrees. So it is modifying the local climate. It is producing these signals. And my friend Scott Stride, who works at JPL in the telecommunication technology, he designed the telecommunication system for the original Mars rover. He said that it's unlikely that these magnetic beams are actual signal beams. He said that there has to be a central beam that these magnetic beams are focusing out in space. And that then we have this description by eyewitnesses that sometimes at night people would see a white beam coming straight out of the ground at the center of where this triangle would be. And that seems to correspond with what Scott is saying, that the signal pattern that we see in these magnetic beams is really an adjustment. Think of, you have a structure that is broadcasting a signal out into space like a radio telescope. But radio telescopes that we build are mobile. They can change direction and move and keep a certain object in the distant sky in focus, whereas a triangle that is embedded within rock cannot. Mm-hmm. So it can only send a signal out to a given point in space, just so long as that object is overhead, right, and within a certain range. Right. So the direction of the signal beam from the center of the triangle has to be constantly changed and shifted. So that's why you are getting these signal patterns in the magnetic beams that were basically coordinates for where the signal beam would be pointing. Now that's just a possibility. Mm-hmm. Of what might have been going on there. But the other thing that came to mind is the reason for the hotspot in the area and why so many craft have been sighted is if you've got these buried transmitters in the ground sending signals out into space, what do you think anybody out in space who runs into them is going to want to do? They want to say, hey, where's that coming from? Let's go check it out.
Yeah, that's a good explanation.
It is.
A good explanation.
It's a very good explanation.
And so we're getting a lot of visitors coming in at that point.
It seems at this point, if the Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff, that organization full of ex-CIA and Pentagon officials, that they have to get enough pull with the federal government to just do eminent domain and go in. And I'm sorry about the Jewish cemetery and the Korean farmers, but as a matter of national security, that has to be excavated, and we got to see what this 540-foot thing down there really is.
Right. Yeah, Jack, do you realize they actually tried to do that?
They did.
With the collider, the different sites for the atom smasher. They had a number of different locations within the United States, right?
Yeah.
And one of them was that very location.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is now, I think, a matter of a national and maybe planetary security because of the USS Nimitz disclosure, about a year ago, and we really have to know now what is going on. And I think I've explained the basic physics of it, but there's a tremendous amount of technological development we have to do because this technology can easily overpower any military technology we have. So it's a matter of some urgency, I would say.
Bruce, you mentioned that you were compiling all this information, these photographs, and I guess you have audio as well, right?
Right, I do have lots of audio, but not in a printed book. I couldn't put the audio.
No, I'm just saying you should think about putting that on your website. I mean, that would be really fascinating to see more of those pictures and that audio.
I do. I have it on my website.
I guess I didn't find it. Oh boy.
And there are two web pages that are titled Reverse Doppler. And they have not only the audio, but the spectrograms for those. And I can send you links to that.
Okay.
So you can find them.
Yeah.
I had built a table of contents web page that lists all of these web links, hundreds of them. Okay, or well, not hundreds, but many dozens.
Yeah.
And so that a person can locate some of the stuff that we're talking about here. But it takes time for somebody to go through all of this stuff. It's like pulling out an encyclopedia from the library shelf, and you're not going to get through that in a day.
Sure.
No,
I'm looking at
tremendous amount of material.
I'm looking at one of them now. It's I think it's the Manta Ray. It's a photograph of the Manta Ray, and that's a pretty spectacular photograph. I missed that when I was going through your website the other day, but I mean that is an amazing photograph. You have the top nose light, the panel reflection, the port headlight, starboard head. That's pretty amazing. If that's an indication of the quality of photography and video you guys were doing, I mean, I want to see more of that. I would love to go through all this stuff.
One of the interesting things that the last sighting that I had of the Manta Ray was with Billy McNamara at his parents' house, or near his parents' house, in Salt Point, New York. And Billy is a Hollywood actor, acted in many movies, and you can pull him up on Google. And he saw my website and called me and said that he was seeing the same things I have on my website over his parents' property. So he invited me to come, and I went there. And our first night, we went out of the field, and he was saying, "I've seen these things come out of the ground and go back down into the ground. There's got to be an underground base here. I've seen these doors, these hatches, open up in local farm fields, and somebody climb out and close the hatch. So what's going on here?" He thinks that the military is in some way involved in all of this.
Oh, this Manta Ray thing is incredible. I'm watching it now. This is just, you have it stop, you have really nice little stop video animation kind of thing going on here. That is mind-blowing.
But what I wanted to talk about with Jack is that as this came towards us, the craft started to turn sideways. And then by the time it got up to us, it was moving towards us backwards and slowing down, just like a skater would change directions on ice, as the skater would turn around and start pushing off on the ice in the opposite direction, or in the direction he wants to go.
Yeah, well, that's consistent with the Alcubierre warp drive idea. That's totally what one would expect. So,
And one of the other things is that and I have two videos, one taken by Ellen Crystal and one taken by me, of this Manta Ray doing the same thing, and it changes its position of the lights in the front. It goes from one central light and two large bright light outer lights to two central lights, one on top of the other. Then the one on top moves forward of the one underneath it, moves down to the side of the one underneath it, then moves back underneath that one on the belly of the craft. So that the lights can be moved around on the surface of its hull.
They're not. Looks like they're not fixed lights. They can just move anywhere they want, any spot on the object.
And the other thing that was concerning me is why put these bright lights that can rotate at the outer sides of the craft. And it suddenly dawned on me, if these craft are hiding underground and went into tunnels, wouldn't they have to illuminate the sides of the tunnels and the floor of the tunnel so that they didn't run into it?
Very, very, very interesting deduction, Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
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 So this sort of supports the idea that we have underground base. And Ellen Crystal has noted that holes opening up in the ground. And I've read stories from Italy of these contactees that told how they could expand an open space in solid rock and compress the matter in that space along to form the size of a chamber.
Well, you're breaking up there.
Yeah.
Would you repeat that? Your voice was breaking up there.
Okay.
Are you on a cell phone?
Yes.
Oh, that's the problem. We're losing signal now.
Well, I can hear him.
Okay.
He's coming through.
Can you repeat just go over that again, and Kim can edit out all this stuff. Go ahead.
Okay. That these contactees said that they said they live in an underground base underneath the Adrian Sea, and that they can have the ability of expanding a location of space and compressing the matter to form the walls of the chamber where they would be living, or their base would be located. And then when they're done and leave, they can allow that whatever that force was to bring that matter back to its original position. So they can create holes in crust anywhere they want, and they can create tunnels through our crust so that they can enter and leave. And I don't know if Ellen said that out in the field she ran into a situation where this hot air was coming out of the ground, and she saw this hole opening up right in the field, a farm field, and then it closed. And so
yes,
there may be some truth to that.
Okay,
well, I mean,
but let me make a statement on that. Yeah, that's all totally consistent with what I call the low power warp drive metric engineering that I'm working on. Hal Puthoff is also working on it. He has one piece of the puzzle. I have the other piece, and the two pieces together pretty much complete the picture. So all that kind of phenomena you're describing makes perfect qualitative sense to me. And this is this is a very important technology that we have to get control of, and we better do it soon before it's too late. And I agree. I don't want to sound like H.G. Wells. I don't want to sound like Orson Welles in War of the Worlds radio broadcast. But I think that's pretty close to what's going on here.
Well, we're ramping up our space exploration efforts and heading back to the moon. So, I mean, there's a lot of money going to be put into this. It's going to have to be put into this if we want to accomplish all of this. And this type of activity should be also included in research.
Yeah, well, I hope so. And the thing is that I should mention that I've been interviewed by Russian television twice now. Once about the sort of weird physics stuff, like what we're talking about, and the other about politics. I don't want to go into details, but it was Channel 5 from St. Petersburg, which is owned by a very close friend of Vladimir Putin, and I was told that Vladimir Putin himself has a personal interest in all this kind of weird stuff that's going on. I've been told that by several Russians now. And also, the Russians
Wow.
the Russians are translating all of my work into Russian. Rather recently, I was contacted.
Well, there's an amazing number of Russians on YouTube that are presenting their findings, aren't they, on trying to develop a anti-gravity type devices.
Oh yeah, well yes, yeah. When we were, we had a couple of Russian scientists from Moscow. When Joe Firmage briefly had, the ISSO organization that I was part of. So this is all very true indeed.
Well, look, Bruce, I think we pretty much covered everything that we intended to cover today, and I want to have you on again. I just, as things develop, and when you do get your book finally compiled, please let us know, because I'll definitely want to discuss that.
What I'm going to do is finalize my appendix, which has all of the raw data in it and the pictures, because that by itself can be put out there, okay? And because one of the things my web pages do not allow is easy access to all of the different data. But if you have just maybe 35 pages of nothing but a description of location, time, and with the photographs, that would impact the reader much more than leafing through web pages.
Yeah. Well, you probably have. This is probably the most exhaustive documentation of this kind of phenomenon that's ever been done. I don't know of anybody else who's done this.
Yeah, well, Bruce, so you were a geologist, right? You're a geologist originally, so you're using all your scientific training and methodology with geological data for this kind of UFO data.
Exactly. Yeah. Also, I'm going to be giving 2 talks at the Conference of Future Energy in Albuquerque in August of this year. I'm a guest speaker there, and I'm going to be presenting all of these data both Friday night and Saturday night. My Saturday night talk, I've been given 90 minutes, and I have that PowerPoint presented, and it gets right into the heart of it.
Good. Hopefully somebody videos it.
Yeah, it'll be on video. I'm sure. I hope it'll be on YouTube. And if you need any help with the book on any of the theoretical explanation, I'm more than willing to assist you on that.
Oh, believe me, I'm going to be there talking to you, Jack.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, great, Bruce. Well, listen, we're going to wrap it up, and you have a great day and a great weekend, okay?
Okay, Bruce.
All right.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Kim. Bye, Jack.